Welcome to Who's That Pokemon, the most in-depth Pokemon anime rewatch podcast on the entire internet. If you didn't know, this is a retrospective look back on the Pokemon anime series, episode by episode from the very beginning. This show has been airing for over 20 years now and has over 1,000 episodes, yet it somehow seems to get neglected by Pokemon fans, so I thought it was about time I got the podcast dedicated to it that it deserves. Today's episode is the 11th episode of the Indigo League series titled Charmander, the Stray Pokemon. The Japanese title is essentially exactly the same. This episode first aired on June 10, 1997 in Japan and on September 22, 1998 in the United States. On this day in Pokemon history for both of these air dates, we've got nothing of note this week. The screenplay for Charmander the Stray Pokemon was written by Junki Takagami. This is his second episode writing for the anime. His first episode was back in episode 5, which was Showdown in Pewter City, the first ever gym battle episode. The only major debut for this episode is Ash's Charmander, and unsurprisingly, the Who's That Pokemon is also Charmander. So, not a whole lot to discuss before we get into the summary, so let's just get straight into it. It's a big episode, this one. Time for the episode summary and discussion. Ash and his friends seem to have lost their way en route to Vermilion City again, which frustrates Misty. The group stops to consult Brock's map, and Ash determines that the trail they're on is going to intersect with Route 24, which in turn leads straight into Vermilion City. Brock is satisfied with this and puts the map away, but as they move, a large shadow suddenly falls across their path. Soon, the sunlight's intensity dims, revealing a Charmander sitting upon a rock. After checking his Pokedex, Ash is happy that he has a chance to catch a Charmander. Brock points out how weak its tail flame is, and that it probably needs some sort of medical assistance. However, Charmander resists Ash's attempt to catch it. Brock suggests that Ash try again, but Ash's second attempt also fails. Pikachu then climbs up onto the rock and talks to the Charmander. He then comes back down and manages to communicate to Ash that Charmander is waiting for someone to come back and pick it up. Brock decides that if it belongs to someone else, it's best to leave it, and they go off to try and find their way towards Vermilion City. So I feel like I talk about this every week at this point, but Ash is still obsessed with catching Pokemon. Like, it keeps coming up every single episode, but yeah, he's still obsessed with catching Pokemon. Every time he sees a new Pokemon he hasn't seen before, he's trying to catch it, which I still want to know when this sort of obsession that Ash has comes to an end. The gang is lost again here, which, surprise, surprise, when aren't they lost in some sort of forest or on some sort of mysterious path. Misty, again, is afraid of bugs in this little opening section, which they're just really hitting all the sort of cliches in the first couple of minutes of this episode, just one after the other. It's also quite incredible that they never noticed the Charmander that's sitting literally like 5 meters from them, which, like, they're searching all around for the correct way to get to Vermilion City, and they don't notice this Charmander sitting on a rock. Like, I feel like you'd probably notice that, Ash. The Charmander dies if its flame goes out line. That comes from the Pokedex. Causes a lot of grief for me. People just assume that if you get it wet, it'll die. Like, oh, that'll automatically put out the flame, and that's how you defeat a Charmander. That's how you kill a Charmander. Which, like, obviously, clearly that isn't the case. Just getting it wet isn't going to put out its tail flame. Like, it's not that simple. These are magical creatures. It can survive a little bit of water. So trivia already. This is the first ever episode that mentions that a Pokemon could die, which they don't often bring a whole lot of attention to the fact that, like, death can be a thing. There are obviously examples where Pokemon actually die. You see that in Pokemon Heroes and Lucario and the Mystery of Mew. We see Pokemon actually die. But for the most part, they try their best to steer clear of it. In general, in the franchise, they always emphasize that it's Pokemon fainting, not dying when they are defeated in battle. Brock has a really awkward line here. He says, "Catch it and we'll take it to Pokemon Center for help," which just flows really weirdly. Like, why does he say take it to Pokemon Center, like, not to the Pokemon Center? Like, you couldn't have fit the in there. It's just, yeah, when he said it, it just really caught me off guard. I'm like, why is he speaking in such a weird way? It was really, really strange. We see Charmander actually go inside the Pokeball when Ash attempts to catch it, which actually implies that it had been released by Damien, which I don't know if it's intentional from the writers here. It might have been just a mistake, but I think if it was intentional, it's a cool little detail knowing that Damien literally did, like, he didn't just abandon it on a rock, he, like, quite literally released it as well. He was completely done with this Charmander, which makes him seem like even a bigger dick when later on he tries to claim that the Charmander's his and that he deserves to have it back now that it's powerful. And continuing on the Charmander theme here, while Pidgeotto and Butterfree have really got, like, no personality whatsoever, they really turned this around for Ash's next 3 Pokemon acquisitions. Bulbasaur has a distinct personality, just based on the last episode. Like, he's got a whole lot of personality already. And Charmander is full of personality from the first scene it's shown in. So, like, it's a huge step up from the 2 he's caught before. And obviously Squirtle is to come next episode, and he has a whole lot of character too, which I vastly prefer that to when Ash just has Pokemon that are there, like, they just exist, and they exist basically purely to have battles, but they don't ever really get any sort of character development. Like, could you honestly even describe the personality of Butterfree and Pidgeotto? I really couldn't. Butterfree, I guess when it was a Caterpie, you can kind of talk about, like, how it just kind of wanted to be loved and was kind of insecure and just, wanted to be accepted. But once it evolves to Metapod and then into Butterfree, it doesn't really get any personality. Like, Butterfree doesn't do anything of note until it gets released, really. Well, it gets traded, and then traded back, and then released, so, yeah. I mean, Pidgeotto, it really doesn't have a personality either. I really much prefer the direction of having Ash's Pokemon actually have distinct personalities. So further along the trail, Ash and his friends discover the Pokemon Center that is on their map, and they enter just as it begins to start raining. Despite Brock's concerns, Ash reassures him and points out that there's no way the Charmander would have waited around that long. However, they overhear laughter nearby and look over to see a trainer named Damien surrounded by a group of friends. They listen in on his conversation, and Damien reveals that he had a Charmander, but since it was so weak, he left it out on a rock in the middle of the woods, promising to return for it, though he admits he has no intention of doing so whatsoever. Ash and his friends conclude that the Charmander they saw, and that based on Damien's description, are one and the same. This pushes the normally calm Brock over the edge, and he confronts Damien, demanding he retrieves his Charmander. Damien pushes him off, but Ash and Misty soon arrive to back up Brock. After Damien and his crew leave, Ash, Misty, and Brock hurry back to find Charmander.
Hey, go and get it! Huh? That Charmander is still waiting for you. Go and get it now!
Why should I?
You lied to your Pokemon and said you'd be back. Now it's waiting out there in the rain for you. And if its tail flame goes out, it'll die.
Before I get into my notes on this little scene here, just shout out to Damien pronouncing Charmander as Charminder. I'm not even sure what Damien's accent is supposed to be here. It's like, it kind of feels like sort of all over the place. And, like, I don't know, it's just the way he pronounced Charmander just cracks me up every time. I've said it before, but I do really love how different and unique they make each Pokemon Center in the show. This one here is kind of built like a log cabin, which makes a lot of sense. They're out in the middle of, like, a rural, like, area. So I do like that it's just like a nice log cabin instead of just building the same kind of futuristic-y structure that the Pokemon Centers seem to be in the games. So we're introduced to Damien here, and Damien is voiced by Maddie Blaustein. Maddie is obviously the more well-known voice for Meowth, and was part of the anime up until the voice actor split. When parts of this episode were reanimated for the fires of a Red Hot reunion, Damien was voiced by Eli James. James has been working on the show since the Diamond and Pearl series, with his most notable role being Volkner, but he's never really had sort of a really important sort of character other than Volkner. Volkner is literally like his big character, and that was quite a while ago now, actually. Yeah, it's probably... No, it might have been 10 years ago, almost. Yeah, it would be close to being a decade since that role. I honestly can't believe it takes Damien to literally spell out that he abandoned Charmander for the group to pick up on the fact that it was his that they encountered. Like, what are the odds that you, one, encountered a Charmander waiting around earlier on, and then you come across a guy bragging about, like, this weak Charmander that he had? Like, surely you could put two and two together. It takes him literally saying, like, yeah, I fucking abandoned it there. which, come on guys, you're just smarter than that, come on. I really do love Brock being so angry over Damien's actions. He quite literally manhandles him in this scene. He full grabs him by the collar and demands that he goes back and gets Charmander. I think this is actually really great character development for Brock. We saw it in the last episode as well, where he offered to stay with Melanie because she was kind of the Pokemon nurse, Pokemon breeder. She's operating in that sort of role. And again, Brock cares so deeply for Pokemon in a health sense, and it just fits perfectly that he would go off and have this reaction when he's normally quite reserved and doesn't really get angry like that. So I love it. Brock is getting a whole lot of really great character development here that I'd honestly forgotten about. Everybody remembers these episodes for, oh yeah, Ash catches his starter Pokemon here. But no, Brock's actually got some really great character development in these past 2 episodes. I love it. One little note for Nurse Joy, just let them fight. Come on, Damien is a complete dick and deserves it, but Nurse Joy has to come in, be a wet blanket and break it up, saying that battling in a Pokemon Center is frowned upon. But, I mean, I don't know if it was going to be a Pokemon battle, or if it seemed like it was more going to be people throwing fists at each other. Sort of going off that note as well, it's revealed in this episode that using a battle to settle a personal argument is frowned upon, and that Pokemon battles are not supposed to occur in Pokemon Centers, which, ironically, Pokemon Platinum introduces the concept of battling trainers in Pokemon Centers, so that sort of flies right out of the window with that. So, back to the episode's story here. The 3 race back through the pouring rain towards the rock where the Charmander is, and they find it under attack from a gang of Spearow. Ash tries to drive them off by throwing a rock at them, but the Spearow turn their attention to him and his friends. Ash orders a Thunder Shock from Pikachu, and he obeys, scaring off the Spearow. The group quickly wrap Charmander up in their raincoats and race back to the Pokemon Center, begging Nurse Joy to help. Initially, Nurse Joy is angry at Ash and his friends, but Ash explains that it was Damien that left the Charmander there, taking advantage of Charmander's loyalty. Brock pleads with Nurse Joy to save the Charmander, and she promises to do whatever she can. After an intense and distressing wait, Nurse Joy finally comes out of the operating room and reports that Charmander has pulled through and will be fine by the morning.
Joy, please help us.
What is it? What's wrong?
This Charmander is in bad shape.
The flame on its tail.
There's not much time.
There's a very weird moment here when they're running through the rain towards Charmander. Misty starts complaining that they're out in the rain helping a Pokemon, and she's kind of seems annoyed that they're doing this instead of, cooped up in a nice, warm Pokemon Center, which would obviously be much more preferable for Misty. But then she kind of flips around when Ash, tells her to piss off. He's like, if you don't like it so much, go away, go back. We're out here to save Charmander. We're going to do that no matter what. And then her response to that is, she acts all sort of heroic, she's doing a really great deed. It's well, no, you're out here complaining that you have to do it. Just buzz off. I know, it's a really weird moment, and it doesn't flow well, and I'm assuming it's, something maybe that 4Kids had trouble accurately translating from the original Japanese, and that's why it comes across so awkward here. I found it very odd that these random Spearow just start gang attacking Charmander. What was the point? That Charmander, I guarantee, didn't do anything to the Spearow. It was literally, waiting on that rock, sort of clinging to life, and these Spearow come along and just peck the shit out of it. It's just, they really go out of their way to make Spearow seem like dicks in the anime. From a sort of visual standpoint, I really like this episode. We get a lot of really cool night shots, which, honestly, if your episode includes a lot of cool night shots, I'm probably going to be a big fan of it. It's the reason why I was such a big fan of Detective Pikachu, for the same sort of reasons. There's a lot of cool night shots with neon signs, and I've always just really loved that sort of aesthetic. But, yeah, we just get a lot of really cool shots here, and it's just in general, I think it's a big upgrade over last episode's poor animation. If you listen to last episode, you'll know how many animation errors were in the episode, and in general, it just had a very low budget sort of look, so I think it's a huge step up here. Morning arrives and Brock's shout causes Ash to fall off the couch. It turns out Charmander has disappeared from the emergency room. Ash is certain that the Charmander has simply gone back to the rock. Brock wants to go after it again, but Misty points out that it is no use. Even though Damien does not care about it, the Charmander is still stubbornly loyal to him. Although Brock is still disappointed, Ash and his friends leave the Pokemon Center. Meanwhile, up ahead, Team Rocket make their first appearance of the episode. They've just finished digging another pitfall trap for the twerps. However, Pikachu's light weight does not activate the trap. Jesse and James argue over who is responsible for this failure until Meowth silences them with some scratches to the face. Ash, Brock and Misty, being a lot heavier than Pikachu, end up triggering the trap and fall into the hole. Team Rocket then appears, laughing at the fact that their trap worked. Pikachu tries to shock them, but Team Rocket's rubber uniforms insulate them against electricity. Pikachu tries to run, but they release a special ball that swallows Pikachu and also insulates his electricity.
It's too strong. You used too many branches.
Me? You're the one who covered it with too much dirt.
Mouth! Quiet!
Whoa, you feel something?
I did.
Huh? Feel what? Pikachu.
Brock really cares so much for Charmander here in this episode. It almost feels like that he should be the one catching it instead of Ash. He is just always going to bat for this Charmander. He wants to go back out and search for it yet again, even though they kind of know that Charmander is not going to give up on Damien. Brock is still like, no, we need to go out. Like, this Charmander is putting itself in danger by doing this. He doesn't want this Pokemon to get hurt, and it feels like he should be the one to have it. He's kind of the one having the connection with it. If they did go that route, with Brock getting Charmander and Ash having Bulbasaur, I feel like then they could have naturally just given Squirtle to Misty, and then they each have one of the starter Pokemon, kind of like what they would do in later seasons, like when Ash got Trico, Brock got Mudkip, and May got Torchic. It feels like they were kind of building to that. Like, this episode really focuses on Brock quite a bit, and it wouldn't, be a surprise to see him get Charmander. It would also make sense. I mean, I guess Charmander is the closest thing to sort of a rock type, so it would sort of fit in with his rock gym leader team, and then Misty gets the water type. It would make a whole lot of sense, and, honestly, thinking back on it, I would have liked it. It probably would have given Misty and Brock some Pokemon with actual personality outside of, Togepi. Oh, good lord, I've got to talk about Team Rocket here. I thought their last kind of contraption that they had was outlandish, but the one they have here takes the cake. It's just an absolute monstrosity. It's like a anthropomorphic drill kind of robot android thing that is so weird. And then it, just everything about it is so strange. The way it hides behind a tree after it's done, it's just bizarre. Team Rocket are having some really funny moments here. And I've got to mention how funny it is that their plan works. They capture Pikachu here, but sort of accidentally, because they were planning for that kind of trap, the pitfall trap, to either just have Pikachu fall in or to have them all fall in with Pikachu, which both of those scenarios seem not as good as having Pikachu walk over it fine and having the rest of them fall in so they can't sort of stop them from taking Pikachu. Their accidental plan is way better than their actual plan. Also got to shout out Meowth for admonishing Jesse and James for just getting yet another hole digger. I feel like they've used the pitfall gag not that often. They are starting to use it pretty frequently in the show, and I do like that Meowth mentioning it is a little subtle nod to yeah, we know that they keep doing pitfall gags, but we realize it too. Team Rocket prepares to leave with Pikachu in tow, though Charmander confronts them. Charmander, as translated by Meowth, orders them to give Pikachu back to Ash and the others. Team Rocket refuses and warns Charmander to beat it or else. Charmander responds by closing its eyes, focusing hard and unleashing a massive flamethrower, which roasts Team Rocket. They drop Pikachu and flee. Ash, Misty and Brock, having gotten out of the pit, then thank Charmander for its help, and Ash asks Charmander if it wants to come along with them.
It's saying you better give Pikachu back to those guys right now.
It's got to be kidding.
Now step aside, you insolent little firebug. We haven't got time to play with you.
Team Rocket plays rough, so get moving.
You see? Didn't I tell you we needed fireproof uniforms?
Honestly, this whole Team Rocket appearance is just sort of filler for the episode and a really ham-fisted way to have Charmander come back into Ash, Misty, and Brock's sort of path. But it's so funny that it gets a pass from me. That's honestly what I'm looking for from Team Rocket. I want them to have like a genuinely interesting impact on the plot, or I want them to be really funny. It's got to be one or the other. It could be both. I would love if it's both. But if it's not one of those two things, I honestly think that it's just like, oh, whatever. Like, later on, when it becomes a little bit harder to sort of make their standard, like, token appearances more interesting, I think then that's when they sort of just fall into, like, oh, whatever, here's the Team Rocket appearance, and it's not funny or interesting. But, yeah, here, and a lot of their early appearances have been quite good. However, before Charmander can give out an answer, Damien, who witnessed Charmander's impressive flamethrower, claims that he has come back for Charmander just as he promised. Damien goes on to say that abandoning Charmander had made it stronger. Despite retorts from Ash and his friends, Damien brags about his methods of training and the way he treats Pokemon. When he tries to recall Charmander by throwing his Pokeball, it rejects him as his trainer by throwing the ball right back at him with its tail. Enraged, Damien attempts to attack Charmander with all his Pokeballs. Charmander then responds with a flamethrower followed by Pikachu's Thunderbolt, which are aimed at Damien and prompt him to flee. After some negotiation, Brock insists Ash should have Charmander, and the Fire-type Pokemon happily jumps into Ash's Pokeball.
I'm sure you'll raise Charmander to become a great Pokemon.
Thank you, Brock. Come on, Charmander. Welcome to the group. Char! You got a Pokemon and a new friend. Yeah!
And so, Charmander joins Ash and his friends on their journey. Maybe getting lost isn't so bad after all.
So the way Damien jumps out here is really creepy. He's hiding in the bushes and then jumps out, which, like, maybe he snuck up, like he saw them, and then he's like, oh, I'm gonna watch what they're doing. I'll hide in the bushes and see what's going on here with these assholes that tried to fight me in the Pokemon Center. But personally, I like to believe that he was just hiding in the bushes like a creepy Pokemon pervert, and all of this just happened to take place in front of him. It's a lot funnier in that scenario in my head. So as I kind of alluded to earlier, when ordering Charmander to return, Damien is shown throwing Charmander's Pokeball at it instead of using the return function of the Pokeball. This, again, implies that Damien had released Charmander from his Pokeball when he abandoned it, which, again, as I mentioned earlier, adds a lot more, I think, to the episode. As I sort of touched on in the summary, Ash offers to Brock, like, to give him the Charmander, to let him have the Charmander, which, as I mentioned, it makes a lot of sense, but then Brock gives the flimsiest reason why Ash should have it instead. Yeah, Ash did help out with trying to save Charmander from the rain and all that, and Ash was the first person to try and catch Charmander. But it really feels like Brock built a kind of relationship with Charmander in this episode, and just, I don't know, there's no real argument you could make about Ash having a better claim to having Charmander, other than the fact that he was the first one to try and catch it. Like, he called dibs on it or something. So with Ash catching Charmander, I thought I'd give some trivia out on Ash's Charmander / Charmeleon / Charizard. So out of all of the Pokemon in the anime, Charizard has used the most moves with its total of 17, which is quite a lot. Also, out of all of Ash's Pokemon, Charizard holds the record for having the most episodes in between its episode of capture and its episode of being left in Professor Oak's care. It took 788 episodes for it to finally land at Professor Oak's lab, which that's a whole lot of episodes. Obviously, we'll be saying goodbye to Charizard in Johto, and then it comes back sporadically, and then finally, 788 episodes later, it comes home to Professor Oak. But yes, with Ash's capture of Charmander, that closes out the episode. What did I think of the episode? Well, this is actually a really good episode that still holds up today. The idea of what happens to Pokemon who have been abandoned by their trainers is such an interesting one, and I think it really helps make an episode like this a strong episode. Damien is just so easy to hate, and the narrative actually makes Brock grow a bunch as a character, so much so that it almost makes no sense that he isn't the one with Charmander in the end. Speaking of Charmander, this is just the perfect debut for it. It gains so much personality here, and as I mentioned at the start, I love the way that they introduce Ash's starter Pokemon compared to his first two captures. Also, Team Rocket are so funny here, so the episode gets major points for that. Overall, It's not quite the best episode I've watched so far. It's probably just a step down from the sort of top contenders at the moment, which I still have the Bulbasaur episode and... Well, the Bulbasaur episode, if the animation was better, would probably be at the top, but the Waterflowers of Cerulean City is just a really good episode that I wasn't expecting to enjoy as much as I did, and that's just holding on to top spot at the moment, but this does give it a run for its money. So the only major event of this episode is Ash catching a Charmander, and Ash's win-loss record is still the same after this episode. It's still 2 wins, 2 losses, because there was no trainer battles in this episode, so his winning streak is still at 1 win. But now it's time for some more trivia about this episode. This is the very first episode that credits Izumi Shimura as an animation director, which, you know, I'm kind of just speaking out of my arse here, but could that be why I enjoyed the animation so much here? I don't know if I'm looking too much into it, but, you know, it's a bit of a coincidence at the very least. Misty at the start of the episode states that the group have been searching 10 days for Vermilion City since they left Cerulean City at the end of the Waterflowers of Cerulean City. So they just really do suck at traveling. It's taking them well over 10 days to get from Cerulean to Vermilion, which, I mean, even if we take into account that it's going to take a lot longer than it does for your little 10-year-old to run there in the games, it still feels like that is an excessive amount of time to get between those two cities. This is the very first episode where Meowth translate a Pokemon speech, which will be used countless times in the future. This episode, much like the other starter Pokemon episodes, is featured on Volume 9 Charmander from Viz Media's Pokemon All-Star series. As I alluded to when I spoke about Damien's voice actor, part of this episode was reanimated and used for flashback material in the Fires of a Red Hot Reunion. In Pokemon Yellow, Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, a boy who is sort of based on Damien appears. He gives out a Charmander on Route 24. However, he noticeably regrets his poor treatment of Charmander. So, it's kind of like Damien, kind of inspired by Damien. It's weird. I mean, it would have been hard to try to sort of accurately represent this in the games. Like, I'm not sure how you accurately represent Damien and the way Ash actually acquires it, so, I mean, I guess it's good enough the way that they did it. And finally, Damien is the only character who abandoned one of Ash's Fire-type Pokemon to not be present when said Pokemon evolves at least once, which is a really quirky piece of trivia, and shout out to whoever managed to notice that. We've got just one error here of note. In the Brazilian Portuguese dub, this episode uses the English version of the Pokerap and an instrumental version of the ending theme instead of the dubbed versions. So, I feel like we've mentioned the Brazilian Portuguese dub quite a bit here. And I mean, shout out to them. They keep having quirky little errors and it gives me content for the podcast. But with all of that trivia out of the way, it's time for some Pokemail. Continuing on the theme that I sort of started last episode, I should say. I want to ask all of you guys, what's your favourite Charmander/Charmeleon/Charizard moment in the show? There are so many moments to choose from. Some of the ones that immediately spring to mind is Charizard defeating Magmar. That is such an awesome moment, I think, definitely in the Kanto region. And look, off the top of my head, I do really enjoy I can't remember the name of the episode where Charizard leaves. It's escaped my mind at the moment, but that is definitely an iconic episode. Also, Charizard coming back during Spell of the Unknown is such an epic moment. I rewatched Spell of the Unknown relatively recently, and as someone who has never really been like, oh yeah, I love Charizard so much, that's still a super epic moment. And imagine as a kid going into that, like how epic that would have been. Especially because there's a good chance that a kid might not have seen like the fact that Charizard's in it. Like it was featured on posters and trailers and stuff, but when you're a young kid, I feel like it's pretty easy for you to sort of just like somehow miss out on that. So imagine going into that and then just like seeing Charizard return. I mean, I have no doubt kids would have been screaming in the theater. But that's basically all for this episode. Thanks for listening to Who's That Pokemon. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you're not subscribed to the podcast, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, basically anywhere you can download a podcast. You can also find the show on Twitter at Who's That PKMN Pod to keep up with the latest updates and going-ons for the show and memes and all of that general tomfoolery. And you can also follow me personally on Twitter as at SauceMarlow. That's all for this episode. I hope you join me again next time as I take a look back at Here Comes the Squirtle Squad. This is the final episode of the 3-part Kanto Starters arc, and after this episode, Ash is going to have a full team of 6 Pokemon for the first time ever.